Here are the papers for the divorce." As I greeted our relatives and laughed lightly, Dean said, "I'm taking all the inheritance for myself." He said this with a big yawn. "What? In this case, are you joking around? How could you?" "It's not a joke. Because you were my dad's favorite, I didn't want to marry you. I have to take over my dad's business, which means I get all of the money he left me. We no longer need you now that Dad is gone." Dean was only thinking about the inheritance, even though his father had just died. When Dean spoke, something inside me broke that I had been holding back. My father-in-law used to help me a lot, and I put up with a lot for him, but I can't take it any longer. "Fine, I'll grant you the divorce." I chose revenge to protect the business my late father-in-law had left behind and to get back the self-respect I had lost when I married Dean. It's not over yet. My name is Brenda Lewis. This year, I'll be 33 years old. When I was 25, my father died in an accident, and I had to take over Cooper Manufacturing right away. There wasn't time to be sad. At the time, I felt like the job of president was too much for me as a regular worker. Many times my spirit almost broke. My father-in-law Dalton was there for me when things were hard. The news made Dalton rush over right away. He was an old friend of my dad's. Dalton taught me how to run a business from the very beginning, because he owns one himself. His help was very helpful to both me and my business. After 3 years as president, Dalton invited me to dinner and put me in touch with his son Dean. "This is my son Dean, Brenda. He will be in charge of one of our branches now. We hope to work together with your company more. You should be excited to work with us." "It's nice to meet you. My dad has told me a lot of good things about you." Dean said with a smile, "The branch office has been given to me, but I'm still new to this, so please be kind and help me." At first, Dean looked like a very honest young man. Knowing that he was Dalton's son made me confident in his skills, and we quickly became friendly. Dean, whose face was always smiling, asked, "My dad told me that you're running a business at such a young age after your dad died. Given how young you are, your skills are impressive. Which industry does your company work in?" I then told them the name of our business. Our business is called Cooper Manufacturing, and we mostly work with car parts. Even though I'm new as president, I work hard every day to protect the business my father left me. Without the help of many people, like Mr. Lewis, I wouldn't have been sure I could run this business by myself. "You mean Cooper Manufacturing, right?" I've never heard that name before. Dean told them, "I know small factories are having a hard time because of the economy right now, but I'm here for you." Then he gave me a look that seemed like disdain, but he quickly went back to his soft smile. It made me a little uneasy when that change happened, but I quickly told myself I was overthinking it and kept talking while drinking. Dean started to ask me out on dates and for meals more often over time. He asked me to marry him 6 months after we met. "Brenda, let's start something. I've always looked for someone as strong and kind as you." I was hesitant at first, but I decided to go on a date with him because he seemed honest, and I was thankful for Dalton. We got married after going out together for a year. Dean was always nice to me and took great care of me during our engagement. "So, when do you plan to quit your job?" A month after we got married, Dean asked me that question out of the blue while I was making breakfast one morning, stopping the knife I had in my hand. I haven't thought about quitting." In response to my answer, Dean frowned and looked unhappy. "Hey, aren't we married?" "Yes, it's only a branch, but I'm the president. Since you're married and working, it looks like my income isn't enough, which isn't a good impression for other employees." "But my dad left behind this business. I'm not going to leave, no matter what." Dean snorted in disdain and kept talking in a condescending way. "It's just a factory in a small town. The difference between that and big businesses like ours is clear. It dawned on me that the reason I felt awkward when we first met was because Dean thought of the company my dad had left as just a small-town factory. Dean, you shouldn't talk like that. People who work for and with my company are very important to us. I'm not going to quit. Partners in business and staff? That doesn't mean much, does it? Doesn't it seem clear that your business isn't even close to one of ours? I didn't know what to say after hearing what he said. Dean clearly didn't know what it meant to be in charge of a business, no matter how big or small. I paused for a moment and tried to deal with things calmly. Dean, a company's worth isn't just based on how big it is. Even if it's small, my company is important in its own way. I get it. It's important to you, but face reality. It's unimaginable that a company run by someone as inexperienced as you could survive. After throwing those words at me, Dean glanced at me with contempt. His attitude was so shocking that it went beyond anger. My father was a warm-hearted president who cherished his employees. I always admired my father for that, but Dean insulted my father. Struggling to contain my trembling anger, I barely managed to respond. Dean, our companies may differ in size, but our employees and partners are important too. It's wrong to belittle them like that. And please stop looking down on my company as just a small-town factory. So what? It's just a local business, right? Our company handles various products, including automobiles and appliances. The difference in scale is clear. This is why it's troublesome with beginners, really. It's disheartening. I'll have breakfast outside, Dean sighed, leaving for work without waiting for a reply. Left alone, I could only stand there. Then, the tears I had been holding back began to overflow. Wiping my tears, I cleaned up the breakfast dishes with a feeling of frustration. Frustration, sadness, and my disappointment and revulsion towards Dean muddled my emotions. That evening, when I returned home exhausted, Dean was unexpectedly already back. As I opened the front door, the aroma of delicious cooking filled the house. "I'm home," I said quietly. In response to my words, Dean peeked out from the kitchen. "Welcome back, Brenda." His voice was warmer than it had been in the morning. As I stood there puzzled, Dean began to speak. "I'm sorry about this morning. I was stressed from work and took it out on you. I shouldn't have directed it at you," he apologized to me. The sight of him apologizing gradually dissolved the anger in my heart. As a gesture of reconciliation, he tried to prepare dinner. "I'm not confident about the taste, though," Dean said with a bashful smile. His words made me smile involuntarily. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." I expressed my gratitude. We sat down at the table together and began eating the meal Dean had prepared. While the food wasn't gourmet, his effort made it strangely delicious. "It's good. Thank you, Dean," I murmured softly. Dean smiled satisfactorily at that. With this, our argument seemed to have ended, but afterward there was a noticeable change in Dean's behavior. For a time, he regained his former kindness, but gradually he became colder towards me, and his disparaging remarks about my company increased. A year into our marriage, his behavior resembled that of a tyrannical ruler. When I came home late from work, he greeted me sarcastically while lying on the sofa. "Finally home, huh? Madam President, what time do you think it is?" "I'm sorry. I was held up by an unexpected meeting. I'll prepare dinner right away," I said, almost apologetically, and hurried to the kitchen. Watching me, Dean scoffed derisively. "A meeting, huh? Were you really working overtime? Is the president of a small-town factory that busy?" I didn't respond to his words and silently started cooking. The relationship between us continued to deteriorate. Dean, disliking mere formal apologies, appeared before me without hiding his anger. "Brenda, do you understand how you're managing to live like this? You're acting like you're just the president of some small-town factory." I internally resisted, but dealing with his company was crucial for mine. I gave up on arguing, but it wasn't that I felt nothing. Struggling to contain my anger, I responded with a trembling voice. I live thanks to your support. I appreciate it. This response irritated Dean, and he became even more aggressive. If you're thankful, show it or apologize from the bottom of your heart, and I'll forgive you. I bit my lip hard to suppress my anger. What's the matter? Can't you do it? If you can't, I don't mind terminating our contract with your company. I can crush your company any time. If there's no apology, I'll suspend our transactions. As he said this with a sneer, I felt disgusted, but decided to protect my company. Though I tried to apologize, my pride wouldn't allow it, and I hesitated. What are you doing? Hurry up. Pushed by his urging, I finally pleaded, please continue doing business with us. I beg you. Seeing me beg so desperately, Dean laughed smugly. Ha! Pathetic! To think such a person is a president. His attitude and contemptuous words made me feel frustrated, but I had no choice but to yield to his threat to stop the transactions. I quietly endured the situation. 3 years into our marriage, Dean's arrogant behavior intensified, and his criticism towards me and my company worsened. Every time I came home, I was almost certainly met with his harsh words. Initially, I protested, but once I realized arguing was pointless, I just let it slide. Really, how late can you be? How long do you plan to keep me waiting? He would greet me angrily and then continue to complain at length about me and my company. You say you've been working late recently, but is your company about to go under? Don't worry. If it fails, I'll hire you after it's ruined. I'll spread the rumor that an incompetent woman destroyed her company. Sneering as he said this, I felt resentment towards him, but I knew arguing was futile, so I remained silent. Perhaps dissatisfied with my attitude, Dean's anger only grew, and he kept complaining to me. You really lack the awareness of being a president. A president is supposed to be the leader of the company, yet you can't do anything beyond your job and taking care of me. If it weren't for me, you couldn't do anything at all. So try harder to please me. With that final accusation, he cheerfully headed to the bedroom. Feeling both anger and emptiness from Dean's attitude, I quietly cleaned up. I was utterly exhausted by such daily routines, and living with Dean had become a torment. Still, I dreamed of the day I could turn the tables on him. For now, I could only endure. That day became unforgettable. I received a call that Dalton, my father-in-law, had fallen ill. When I rushed to the hospital, I found out he was unconscious and in critical condition. As I stepped into the hospital room, Dean stood there, looking lost. I approached slowly and gently took Dalton's hand. Father-in-law, I called out quietly. It seemed like his hand moved slightly, but it might have been my imagination. The next morning, Dalton quietly passed away. On the day of the funeral, I wore black mourning clothes and quietly entered the venue where people were gathering. The number of attendees conveyed how much Dalton was loved. In the solemn atmosphere, I politely greeted each mourner and looked for Dean. The moment I spotted him, an unbelievable scene unfolded before me. Dean, as the chief mourner, wore an inappropriate bored expression and occasionally yawned largely, seemingly unaware of the cold stares from the visitors. Dean, I called out to him quietly. He turned towards me, and his expression changed momentarily, but soon he seemed to lose interest and return to his previous demeanor. I took a deep breath and vowed to remain calm. Are you properly greeting the people who've come for the funeral? Dean scoffed disdainfully, pulled out his smartphone, and said coldly, It's too much hassle. Handle it yourself. I watched in astonishment as he opened a game app. Dean, Your father's funeral is happening right now, I said with a trembling voice, trying to draw his attention, but he continued to ignore me, absorbed in his smartphone. Occasionally, the sound of his game cut through the surrounding silence, and I could feel the icy stares from the attendees. Feeling apologetic to those around us, I tried to gently stop him from using his smartphone. Please, just for today, refrain from it, I pleaded, but Dean shook off my hand without hiding his irritation. Stop bothering me. Let me do what I want. At the funeral, it would be better if this ended sooner. He continued with his insensitive remarks. His words weighed heavily on my heart, and I questioned if this was the man I once loved. There was no trace of respect for Dalton. Eventually, the funeral ended somehow, and as the family gathering for the meal began, Dean blurted out boredly, "Finally, it's over. Here, the divorce papers. I'm taking all the inheritance for myself." He said this half-jokingly as he laughed smugly. In his hand, he already held a divorce paper he had filled out. I stared at Dean, dumbfounded. "What are you joking about in such a situation? How could you? It's no joke. You were Dad's favorite, so I married you reluctantly. There's no choice but for me to take over Dad's company, meaning all the inheritance is mine. With Dad gone, you're no longer needed." Dean seemed only interested in the inheritance, even just after his father had passed away. "Dean, let's put off this talk. There's no need to discuss this right now." "No, we settle this here. If you don't agree to the divorce, I'll terminate all contracts with your company." His statement caused an uproar among the relatives. "Are you really going to do that?" "Yes, I'm serious. Ending the contracts with your small factory won't affect my company." Dean's words pushed me to my limit. I had been grateful to and loved my father-in-law, and so I endured everything because of him, but I could no longer bear it. "Fine, I'll grant you the divorce." As I made the offer, Dean smiled broadly, handed me the divorce papers, and said, "Make sure to submit these soon. By the way, you can stay in the house until next week." Then he left the scene. Trembling with anger, I took only the essentials and immediately checked into a nearby hotel. Since I don't have children, I can be flexible. This helps me respond quickly to situations. The next morning, I went to the courthouse at its opening time to submit the divorce papers. And then, I immediately contacted my secretary to arrange an emergency board meeting in 1 hour. Upon arriving at the company, the board members were already waiting in the conference room. As I entered, they all stood up in respect. Once I took my seat, they sat down as well. "I apologize for the urgency, but there is an important decision that needs to be shared," I began. Someone audibly swallowed in nervousness. "Some may already be aware of yesterday's events," I continued calmly. "Effective today, we will cease all dealings with Lewis Precision Engineering. Please review the contracts to ensure there are no penalties for breach." Voices of surprise filled the meeting room. Lewis Precision Engineering had been a valuable partner to our enterprise, but it was also led by Dean. After all discussions were concluded and the board members had left the room, I walked over to the window and took a deep breath. Looking out, I firmed up my new decision. "Let's take action," I called my secretary and issued the necessary instructions. "Prepare a notice ending our dealings with Lewis Precision Engineering and inform my ex-husband as well. Set up a meeting at 3 p.m. After my secretary nodded and left, I looked out the window again and murmured, "Are you ready?" This is just the beginning. Smiling, I stood in front of the building of Lewis Precision Engineering at 2:45 p.m., adjusting my suit and taking a deep breath. Upon giving my name at reception, I received a polite response. "Miss Cooper, you have a 3 p.m. appointment. Please wait a moment." After a call through the internal line, a young woman quickly came to greet me. Her demeanor made it clear that she was my husband's secretary. We followed her and took the elevator to the top floor of the building. My heart rate increased slightly, but I made an effort to maintain a calm expression. After arriving, the secretary led the way and stopped in front of a large door, giving a light knock. When the door opened, there was Dean seated in a large chair within the spacious office. "What do you want? Is the divorce finalized, or did you come to ask for money?" A woman running a small-town factory must have too much free time on her hands. His voice was dripping with his usual arrogance. Since we had no financial arrangements when we parted, he seemed to misunderstand that I had come to demand something. I quietly took a seat, and after calming myself, continued speaking. "It's been a while, President Lewis. I am here to discuss business matters." "What's with the cold attitude?" He could hardly hide his irritation. Smiling slightly, I slowly took a document out of my bag and said, "I have come to deliver this. As of today, we will be terminating our business dealings with your company." As I spoke calmly, Dean's face changed color, and he froze momentarily. However, his laughter soon filled the room. "You're joking, right? Your company is cutting off business with us? It's just a small-town factory, isn't it?" Dean still seemed unable to grasp the reality. In fact, Lewis Precision Engineering's business with Cooper Manufacturing accounts for 40% of your revenue. This will significantly impact your company. He looked back at me in astonishment. "You're lying. I thought Cooper Manufacturing was just a small-town factory." "You didn't know at all, did you? Cooper Manufacturing actually employs 9,000 people and has an annual revenue of $1 billion. That's absurd." Just as he was about to say something, his secretary discreetly conveyed something to him. At that moment, Dean's complexion changed drastically and turned pale. As I thought about the significant impact our business termination would have on his company, a smile couldn't help but spill across my face. But I never heard such a thing from you. You just assumed when you heard the company name. I simply followed through on what you said. Ending business with Cooper Manufacturing won't affect my company, was what you said, right? I repeated his words calmly, highlighting how crucial they had been for the survival of his company. This break could mean the end of his company. He seemed to realize this as his face grew even paler. Wait a minute, I just misunderstood Cooper Manufacturing as a mere small-town factory. Besides, if you're making so much, why do you always wear such simple clothes? You're joking, right? Brenda, Dean, previously full of confidence, now pleaded weakly. You really don't understand anything. I'm just following my father's teaching. I sighed deeply and looked at him intently. My father despised flaunting wealth and understood its risks well. That's why I live modestly, quite the opposite of you, who squanders money. As I smiled gently, Dean's face turned red with anger and embarrassment, and he fell silent. Just because we're divorced doesn't mean I want to end the dealings. Doing business with Lewis Precision Engineering has indeed been profitable for us. However, recent issues with quality and delays in delivery. I paused mid-sentence and looked directly at Dean. And the main reason is your moral failings. You shirked your responsibilities as the chief mourner at your father's funeral and pushed a divorce paper at me while many relatives watched. You declared all the inheritance is mine. I was drunk. I was sad about my father's death and had some drinks before the funeral. It wasn't intentional. For 3 years since our marriage, you have looked down on me. You never understood my profession, only criticized and insulted me. And yesterday you showed your true colors. If that wasn't your true self, then what is? Dean remained silent, at a loss for words. Dealing with someone who lacks such ethical standards poses a risk to Cooper Manufacturing. That's why we are terminating our dealings. Brenda, please reconsider. Our company will go under. As Dean pleaded in a feeble voice, I responded with a cold smile. Your company will be fine, right? I remember you often said I can buy it out anytime if I really wanted to. Dean's complexion turned ghostly pale. Dean likely never imagined his own words would come back to haunt him like this. "You bastard." As he said this, Dean stood up and swung his arm towards me in anger. At that moment, his movement froze midair. "Do you really intend to overpower me? Go ahead, try it. If you commit violence here, the reputation of Lewis Precision Engineering will only worsen. Moreover, attacking the female president of Cooper Manufacturing would be even more disgraceful." My calm response caused Dean's hand to tremble. Damn it. While filled with rage, he slowly lowered his hand. "This is goodbye. Farewell." With that, I left the room. I could hear Dean's shouts behind me, but they seemed distant now. Half a year had passed since my company ended our business dealings with Lewis Precision Engineering. During that time, the decline of Lewis Precision Engineering was significant. Initially, Dean tried to revive the business. He looked for new business partners and tried to motivate his employees. But once the termination of our dealings became public, his company's credibility rapidly declined. 2 months later, major clients began to cancel their contracts one after another. Dean started offering excessive trading conditions, which further damaged his company's reputation. 4 months in, Lewis Precision Engineering faced financial difficulties. Payments to employees were delayed, and staff began resigning or moving to other companies. The bankruptcy of Lewis Precision Engineering seemed inevitable. That day, I received a phone call. "Hello?" "Brenda." The voice was hoarse and difficult to hear, but I immediately recognized it as Dean. "What is it?" I asked coolly. "Please, I need to talk to you in person." Gone was his previous arrogance, replaced only by a tone of desperation. "All right, let's meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. at Cooper Manufacturing." After hanging up, I sighed heavily. I had decided to end it all. The next day, Dean arrived 10 minutes early for our appointment. He was a shadow of his former self, wearing a worn-out suit, unshaven, with clearly bloodshot eyes from lack of sleep. "Thank you for waiting," I said as I entered the reception room, and Dean quickly stood up. "Brenda, thank you. I'm really glad to see you." His voice was trembling. "Please, I'm begging you to resume business with Lewis Precision Engineering." "Why?" I asked in a cold voice. Dean seemed taken aback for a moment, but then responded with a look of desperation. "My company is on the brink of collapse. I can't even pay my employees, and the pressure from creditors is increasing day by day." "That is the result of your management decisions." My merciless reply changed his complexion. Suddenly, he dropped to his knees and bowed deeply. "Please, just give me one more chance." His figure was pitiful and tragic. The once arrogant man was now prostrating himself on the ground, begging for forgiveness. "Dean," I called, and he briefly lifted his face, showing a glimpse of hope. But I continued, "I'm sorry, but there is no second chance." My cold words froze him. I could see his eyes shift from hope to despair. "But Brenda," Dean tried to continue with a trembling voice, but I cut him off. "Enough. You belittled me for 3 years. Even on the day of your father's funeral, you trampled on my feelings. There is no room for sympathy for someone like you." Dean once again lowered his forehead to the floor, pleading as if seeking pity. "I have already apologized for that. Please, this isn't for the sake of the company, not for me, but genuinely for the employees." My resolve was firm, knowing that such apologies, while necessary, did not erase the consequences of his actions or the underlying attitudes that led to them. This was about more than just business. It was about respect and consequences for the employees. If you had truly put them first, it wouldn't have come to this. This is the result of prioritizing your own protection. Dean's shoulders trembled as he continued in a tearful voice, "Please don't abandon me." In response to Dean's plea, I calmly noted the time. "It's time now, President Lewis. Please leave for today." At that, the secretary entered the room. She took Dean by the hand and gently wiped his tear-streaked face as she let him out. Around noon, I went down to the lobby where Dean was still standing. He looked at me, seemingly about to say something, but his opportunity was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a third party. "President, may I have a moment of your time?" the person asked quietly. Hearing that voice, Dean dropped to his knees in shock. "What's happening?" "Morgan, why are you here?" The employee called Morgan glanced at Dean briefly, but then returned his focus to me. "President, may I have a little of your time?" "No problem. Let's discuss this in the conference room," I answered, moving forward before Dean could say anything. In that instant, Dean tried to grab my arm in a panic. "Wait a minute." "Brenda, what is this about? Why is my subordinate here?" However, before he could touch me, security swiftly intervened. "Morgan, you are a traitor," Dean exclaimed. "You are the one who betrayed me." "Dean, it's clear you pursued only your own interests without any regard for your employees," Morgan replied calmly. At this, Dean's face went completely pale, losing all color. "Morgan, this way," urged him, and we left the area. As we departed, Dean's screams echoed behind us, but I did not look back. Even though Cooper Manufacturing stopped doing business with Lewis Precision Engineering, it continued to grow. With the help of new hires and successful new businesses, the workforce grew to over 12,000, greatly increasing the company's market share and raising standards. Cooper Manufacturing's growth was praised as an important part of the U.S. economy, and I was given the CEO of the Year award. As a woman in charge, my position was strengthened, and the news covered me a lot. In the fall of 5 years later, I went to the ceremony to open Cooper Manufacturing's new offices. I looked out over the wide view of New York from the top floor of this building and thought about the trip that had brought us here. At the end of my speech at the event, I said, "Adversity is the food that makes us stronger." We are strong enough to get through anything. Cooper Manufacturing will keep going in the right direction. The venue was filled with thunderous applause, which hit me hard. Dean's life had changed a great deal. His friends and family were shocked when, out of greed for money, he personally guaranteed company bonds and stole money. After that, his amateurish attempts at investing didn't work out, and he ran up even bigger bills by cheating, which caused his company to fail. It was said that he owed more than $50 million. Even after he stopped being president, his creditors never stopped after him, and he had to make payments every day. He filed for bankruptcy in the hopes that his debts would be cleared, but his spending went too far, and he had to keep making payments. He often missed payments, and the interest added to the amount he owed. It's not certain that he will be able to pay off all of his bills in his lifetime. One day, I saw him by chance working part-time at a nearby grocery store. With thin hair and a blank look, he looked a lot older than the last time I saw him. He was not at all like the man he used to be. Next to a magazine cover that said, "Cooper Manufacturing President among the top 10 in annual income," he stacked shelves without making a sound. I felt a lot of different things when I saw him. The man who used to look down on me was now in this tough spot. Without a word, I turned away and left the scene. 3 years ago, I met a very good-looking man who became the start of my personal life. We got married at the end of last year because of this meeting. He strongly supports my professional decisions and is in favor of my career path. We are together in a great relationship where we help each other and grow. Right now, we're enjoying the happiness of looking forward to a new life. As a mother, I will be taking on a new job next spring, which will be a big change for me. Concerns about finding a balance between work and home life aren't completely gone away, but I'm sure that with the help of family, friends, and coworkers, I will be able to get through these problems. Seeing how much I've grown by this time next year is really exciting for me. I'm determined to work hard toward the goals I have set for myself and create a happy future. I quietly smile as I look out at the big city of New York. I feel accomplished and hopeful, as you can see from my face. When I close my eyes, I talk to my dead father in my mind. Dad, the vision you once had for the company, I have made a reality.